My name is Vanessa Okafor, and I am 35 years old. 8 years ago, my parents told me that if I married Tom, a man whose family had emigrated from Ireland 3 generations back, I would be choosing a stranger's history over my own. Last month, I stood at a podium in front of 600 people and gave a keynote speech at the city's annual Founders Gala. My parents were sitting in the third row. They had been invited as honored guests of the mayor's office, months before anyone connected my married name to the daughter they had not spoken to in 8 years. I watched my mother's face when she finally realized who was standing at that podium. Before I tell you what happened after the speech, please take a moment to like and subscribe. Drop your city and the time where you are watching from. I genuinely read every comment. Let me take you back to the dinner table conversation that started all of this. 8 years ago, I grew up in Cedar Brook, a tight-knit Nigerian-American community within a larger suburban city. The kind of place where culture was not just something you celebrated on holidays, but something woven into every ordinary Tuesday. My father, Emeka Okafor, had immigrated in his 20s, built a successful civil engineering firm from nothing, and held deeply specific expectations about what success and legacy should look like for his children. My mother, Gozi, ran a community organization that supported Nigerian families settling into the city, and she was, by any measure, beloved in our community, warm to everyone outside our immediate family, rigid in ways I did not fully understand until later inside it. I have a younger brother, Chidi, 4 years behind me, who absorbed our parents' expectations more easily than I ever did. He married a woman from our community in his late 20s, in a wedding that lasted 3 full days and that my parents discussed for years afterward as the standard against which everything else would be measured. I was always the daughter who asked too many questions. I met Tom Whitfield in my second year of law school. He sat next to me in a contracts seminar, asked sharper questions than I expected, and had a habit of explaining complicated legal doctrine using sports analogies that somehow always made sense. Tom's family had been in the city for 3 generations, Irish-American on both sides, the kind of background that, on paper, seemed unremarkable to most people who heard about it. It was not unremarkable to my parents. We started dating quietly, the way you date someone when you already suspect, somewhere underneath the excitement, that the relationship is going to require a conversation you are not ready to have yet. I brought him home for the first time after a year together, hopeful in the particular way you are hopeful before you have any actual evidence to support that hope. My father shook his hand politely. My mother asked him several questions about his career plans, his family's background, his understanding of what marriage into our family would actually mean. After he left that evening, my mother sat me down in the kitchen and said the sentence I would carry with me for the next 8 years. She said, "Vanessa, marriage is not just 2 people. It is 2 families, 2 histories, 2 sets of obligations. What does his family understand about ours? What will he understand about raising children who carry both?" I told her Tom was thoughtful, genuinely curious about our culture, willing to learn anything he did not already understand. She said, "Willing to learn is not the same as already knowing. You are not just choosing a husband. You are choosing what your children's history will be, and you are choosing it for them before they exist." My father, uncharacteristically vocal for that conversation, added one sentence that landed harder than my mother's entire speech. He said, "You would be the first Okafor in 3 generations to marry outside everything we built. Have you thought about what that actually costs?" I want to be honest about something. For nearly 2 years after that conversation, I tried, genuinely, to find some version of this relationship that my parents could accept. I asked Tom to attend community events with me, hoping familiarity might soften my parents' resistance. I brought him to church functions, to Chidi's wedding, to the kind of gatherings where he was polite, present, and entirely an outsider. Despite his best efforts, my mother was civil to him at these events. Civil in the specific way that requires enormous, visible effort. The kind of civility that makes everyone in the room understand exactly how much it is costing the person extending it. My father mostly avoided direct conversation with him altogether, finding reasons to be elsewhere whenever Tom was in the room for longer than a polite greeting required. I told myself this was simply going to take time. I had grown up believing that anything difficult eventually resolved itself if you were patient and persistent enough. I did not yet understand that some positions are not actually about time. They are about a decision that has already been made, dressed up as an ongoing conversation to spare everyone the discomfort of saying so directly. Tom proposed during the spring of our 3rd year together, in a small Italian restaurant where we had eaten dinner every Friday since our 2nd date. I called my mother the next morning. The way you call your mother when something enormous and joyful has happened, and some deep, hopeful part of you still believes she will simply be happy for you. She was quiet for several seconds. Then she asked if I had truly thought this through, if I understood what I was choosing to walk away from. I told her I was not walking away from anything. I told her I was choosing to walk towards something, and that the two things were not the same. She told me she needed to discuss this with my father, as though my engagement required a board meeting before it could be acknowledged as real. 2 days later, my father called. He told me in the calm, measured voice he used for decisions he had already finalized, that if I went through with this marriage, I should understand that my mother and I would no longer be welcome at family gatherings, that this was not a punishment, but simply a natural consequence of choosing a different path than the one our family had built. He did not raise his voice once during that entire conversation. He did not need to. The calm was the message. Tom and I were married in October, at a small venue with 60 guests, none of whom were my parents or my brother. Tom's parents, Patricia and Michael, embraced the wedding planning with a warmth that, looking back, I think was their way of compensating for an absence they could sense I was trying not to feel too deeply. Patricia helped me find my dress. Michael walked me down the aisle, a request I made carefully, uncertain how it would feel. And that turned out to feel like exactly the right thing once it actually happened. My mother sent a card 2 weeks before the wedding. Inside was a single handwritten line. I hope you understand what you are giving up. I kept the card. I did not respond to it. There did not seem to be a response that would have changed anything about the message it was actually trying to send. The wedding itself was joyful, genuinely, despite the absence, sitting quietly underneath every photograph. I remember thinking, at one point during the reception, that joy and grief can occupy the exact same moment without canceling each other out. I had not fully understood that until that day. For the first 3 years of our marriage, I maintained occasional, careful contact with my mother. Birthday calls, brief check-ins around major holidays. The kind of contact that exists more to preserve the possibility of a relationship than to actually nourish one. My father did not engage in any contact at all. Not once, in 8 years, beyond a single text message. The year my grandmother died, informing me of the funeral details without any actual invitation to attend in a way that felt welcoming. Chidi occasionally reached out, more genuinely than our parents, though always carefully. The way you reach out to someone, when you are uncertain whether the relationship can survive open acknowledgement of how strange the situation actually is. I built a career during these years that had nothing to do with my family's approval and everything to do with work I found genuinely meaningful. I specialized in urban policy law, eventually moving into a role advising the city's economic development office on housing and infrastructure initiatives. Tom built a name for himself in commercial real estate development, the kind of quiet, steady success that accumulates slowly and then eventually becomes impossible to ignore. I want to walk through, specifically, the 6 months leading up to the gala, because the timing of everything matters enormously to what happened that night. I had been working with the mayor's office for nearly 4 years on a major affordable housing initiative, one that had taken considerable political and bureaucratic effort to move from concept to actual groundbreaking. The Founders Gala is the city's largest annual fundraising event, drawing community leaders, business figures, and city officials together to celebrate the year's major civic accomplishments. Being asked to deliver the keynote addresses, by any measure, within local civic circles, a significant honor. I learned I had been selected for the keynote in March, 5 months before the event itself. What I did not know, until considerably later, was that my parents had been invited as honored guests that same year, separately, through an entirely different channel. My mother's community organization, the one she had built and run for over 2 decades, had been selected to receive a Civic Achievement Award at the same gala. Recognizing decades of work supporting immigrant families across the city, the selection committee for that award operates entirely independently from the keynote speaker selection process. 2 completely separate decisions, made by 2 completely separate groups of people, neither aware of the other's selection. until the final program was assembled roughly 6 weeks before the event. I learned about my parents' invitation only when the gala's program coordinator sent me the full evening's lineup for review, as is standard practice for keynote speakers, so I could ensure my remarks did not overlap awkwardly with other parts of the program. I saw my mother's name listed under the Community Achievement Award recipients. I sat with that information for a long time before deciding what, if anything, to do about it. I called Tom first, the way I called him with every significant decision in our marriage. Sitting at our kitchen table, the program printout between us, he asked me how I felt about it. I told him I genuinely did not know, that some part of me wanted to ask the organizers to adjust the program so we would not be in the same room, and another part of me felt that doing so would be giving my parents a kind of power over my professional life that I was no longer willing to extend them. He asked me a question that ended up clarifying everything. He asked, "Do you actually want them there, or are you only afraid of what it will feel like if they are?" I sat with that question for several days. I eventually realized the honest answer was that I did not particularly want them there in any warm, hopeful sense. But I also recognized something else, something that mattered more than my own discomfort in that specific room. I had built this career, this speech, this entire professional life, without their approval, without their presence, entirely on my own terms. Having them in the audience, invited through their own merit rather than mine, did not diminish anything I had built. If anything, it simply meant they would witness it directly. For the first time in 8 years, without any opportunity for me to soften or filter what they saw, I decided to let the program stand exactly as planned. The gala took place on a Saturday evening in late September, in the city's largest convention hall, 600 attendees. The kind of event with enough scale that I genuinely believed my parents might not even register my presence until I was already at the podium. I arrived early, the way I always do for events requiring public speaking, needing time to settle my nerves before the room filled with people. I saw my parents arrive around 7, my mother in deep blue formal attire, my father in a well-tailored suit, both of them moving through the early reception with the particular comfortable confidence of people accustomed to being respected in rooms like this one. I do not know if they saw me during the reception. I made no effort to approach them, and they made no effort to approach me. We existed in the same large room the way two people who used to know each other intimately sometimes exist at a wedding neither one wanted to skip. Polite distance maintained through sheer mutual avoidance. The Community Achievement Awards were presented during the dinner portion of the evening, before the keynote address. I watched from my seat near the front as my mother accepted the award for her organization, delivering brief, gracious remarks about the immigrant families her work had supported over 22 years. I felt something complicated watching her speak. Pride in the actual work she had built mixed uncomfortably with the specific grief of knowing that work had never extended its warmth toward the daughter sitting 15 feet away. The keynote introduction came 40 minutes later. The mayor's chief of staff walked to the podium and began introducing the evening's keynote speaker, describing 4 years of work on the Affordable Housing Initiative, describing the speaker's background in urban policy law, describing eventually my full name. I watched, from where I sat near the stage, the exact moment my mother's expression shifted. The pleasant, practiced civic event smile she had maintained through the entire evening simply stopped, replaced by something that looked, even from a distance, like genuine shock. My father's reaction was quieter, more controlled, but I noticed his hand, resting on the table, go still in a way that suggested the same recognition landing somewhere underneath his composure. I walked to the podium. I did not look directly at them as I crossed the stage. Though I was acutely aware of exactly where they were sitting, I delivered the speech I had prepared. 18 minutes on the housing initiative, on the specific families it would help, on the years of negotiation and persistence that had brought it from concept to groundbreaking. I did not mention my parents. I did not mention the 8 years of silence. The speech was not in any way about them. That, I think, was precisely what made the moment land the way it did. After the speech, during the closing reception, my mother approached me directly for the first time in 8 years. She stood several feet away initially. The way you approach someone when you are genuinely uncertain whether you are welcome to close the remaining distance, she said. I did not know that was you, until they said your name. I told her I knew. I told her the housing initiative was not connected to anything about our family, simply work I had built independently. Exactly the way I had built everything else over the past 8 years. She was quiet for a long moment, taking in, I think, the specific size of what she had missed. 8 years of a career built entirely without her knowledge or involvement, now standing visibly, undeniably significant. In a room full of people who clearly already understood and respected it, she said, finally, "You built all of this." I had no idea. I told her evenly. That was somewhat the point of the last 8 years. My father approached more slowly. Several minutes later, after my mother had stepped away to compose herself, he did not apologize. Not directly, not in any way that used the actual words. He is not, I think, built for that particular kind of vulnerability, even now. What he said instead was, the housing work, that is significant work. The mayor's office does not select keynote speakers casually. I told him I knew that, and that I had earned the selection entirely on the merits of work he had never once asked about in 8 years. He absorbed that without flinching. The way he absorbs most direct statements, processing it internally rather than responding to it immediately, he said. Eventually, your mother and I have followed your career. From a distance. We did not expect it would lead here. I told him I understood that distance had been the choice they made 8 years ago, and that whatever they had followed from it, they had followed without actually being present for any of it. I do not want to suggest that evening resolved 8 years of estrangement in a single conversation at a gala reception. It did not, and I think pretending otherwise would dishonor how genuinely difficult those 8 years actually were. What it did do was create something that had not existed before that night. An undeniable, witnessed acknowledgement, in front of 600 people from our community, that the daughter they had quietly ridden out of family gatherings had built a life and a career entirely worth respecting. Regardless of whether they had ever approved of the marriage that ran parallel to it, Tom and I talked about the evening at length afterward, sitting on our back porch the way we talk through anything significant. He asked how I felt, watching their faces shift in that room. I told him I felt, surprisingly, less triumphant than I expected, and more simply clear. The work had always mattered more than their approval of it. That evening had simply made the gap between those two things impossible for them to ignore any longer. It has been 5 weeks since the gala. My mother has called twice since that night, conversations that are still careful. Still feeling out new boundaries neither of us has fully mapped yet, but conversations nonetheless. The first sustained contact in 8 years that has not been confined to brief, obligatory check-ins. My father has not called. Though Chidi tells me he has mentioned the housing initiative twice at family gatherings, I was not present for. Each time apparently, was something that sounded close to pride. Even if he has not yet found a way to say so directly to me, I do not know exactly where this leads. I have learned over 8 years not to assume timelines or guaranteed outcomes from people who move carefully and unpredictably, if they move at all. But I know something else now. Something I did not fully understand 8 years ago at that kitchen table conversation that started everything. My mother told me that night that I was choosing what my children's history would be before they existed. She was not entirely wrong. I simply chose a different history than the one she expected. Build on work and partnership and a marriage that has held steady through 8 years of exactly the kind of difficulty she predicted. Just not for any of the reasons she predicted it. That is my story. If you have ever built something entirely on your own terms, only to have the people who doubted you witness it without warning, I want to hear about it. Drop it in the comments, and if this story reminded you that the right life is sometimes built quietly, without anyone's permission, until the proof simply becomes impossible to ignore, share it with someone who needs to hear that today. I will see you in the next one.